Welcome to our deep dive into Doctor Sleep, Stephen King's chilling sequel to The Shining. We're going to be exploring excerpts from the novel itself to understand just how the Overlook Hotel's evil continues to haunt its survivors,
Yes.
the unique challenges of Shining, and how some characters fight for a chance at healing.
It's fascinating how Doctor Sleep doesn't just pick up where The Shining left off, it dives into the profound and lasting impact of trauma. It's not just a ghost story.
Right.
It's a story about the ghosts that live inside us.
Exactly. And you see that right away with Danny Torrance.
Yeah.
He's only 8 years old at the start of Doctor Sleep, but even though he's far from the Overlook Hotel, he's still tormented by its ghostly residents. For those unfamiliar with The Shining, the Overlook was this grand, isolated hotel
Yes.
with a sinister history, and it left a deep psychic scar on young Danny.
And what's so unsettling about Danny's experiences in Doctor Sleep is how real these encounters feel. He isn't just dealing with vague anxieties, he's seeing and feeling these tangible manifestations of the Overlook's evil. It makes you question the nature of reality itself.
There's one detail that always stuck with me: the ghost of Mrs. Massey from room 217.
Oh, yeah.
She was this terrifying presence in The Shining, and she continues to haunt Danny in his dreams.
Yeah.
For anyone who hasn't read The Shining, she's the one who tried to strangle Danny in the bathtub.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That recurring nightmare really highlights how trauma can become embedded in our minds. Mrs. Massey becomes this symbol of Danny's unresolved fear and vulnerability. It's a chilling reminder that the Overlook's grip extends far beyond its physical walls.
it's almost as if the Overlook has infected his very perception of reality. But thankfully, Danny isn't alone.
Right.
He has Dick Halloran, the chef from the Overlook, who we know also possesses Shining, to guide him. Or for anyone tuning in who needs a quick refresher, Shining is a kind of psychic ability
Yeah.
that allows individuals to perceive things beyond the normal senses.
And Dick teaches Danny techniques to shield himself from these psychic attacks, which is fascinating because it raises questions about the impact of these abilities on a child's development. How do you navigate the world when you're constantly bombarded by psychic noise, by the echoes of trauma and evil?
It makes you wonder about the long-term psychological consequences of experiencing such intense paranormal phenomena at such a young age.
Right. And that's what makes Dr. Sleep so compelling. It's not just about cool psychic powers.
Yeah.
It's about the burdens and vulnerabilities that come with them. It forces Danny to confront the darkness of the world and his own inner darkness in ways that no child should have to.
And speaking of confronting darkness, we learn that Dick Halloran has his own history of trauma. In a flashback, he reviews the abuse he suffered at the hands of his grandfather,
Wow.
the Black Grandpa, who exploited Dick's Shining for his own twisted purposes.
That parallel between Danny and Dick's experiences is so powerful. It highlights how Shining can be both a gift and a curse.
Definitely. We see his empathy, his resilience, and his unwavering determination to use his abilities for good.
And I think it's important to note that Dick's past directly shapes how he mentors Danny. He understands the dangers of Shining firsthand, and he's determined to equip Danny with the tools to protect himself, not exploit him.
Absolutely. Dick wants to empower Danny to help him navigate this complex and often terrifying world. But Dr. Sleep isn't just about Danny's struggles. It introduces us to a terrifying new threat, the True Knot.
Uh-huh.
Imagine psychic vampires, individuals who feed on the shining of others, particularly children, to sustain their own unnatural lifespans. They call it steam, and it's essentially the life force of those who shine.
What I find truly unsettling about the True Knot is their ability to blend in.
Right.
They travel in RVs, posing as ordinary Americans, hiding their horrific nature behind a veneer of normalcy.
It's that chilling contrast that makes them so frightening. You'd never suspect these outwardly normal folks are committing such atrocities.
It plays on our fears, doesn't it? The idea that evil can lurk right under our noses, disguised in everyday facades. It really makes you question who around us might be hiding something extraordinary and potentially dangerous.
And their method of feeding, consuming steam, the essence of shining, adds another layer of horror to their crimes.
Hmm.
It's not just physical violence. They're stealing the very life force of these children, leaving them empty and broken.
It speaks to a profound level of depravity, a complete disregard for human life.
Yeah.
It's a violation of innocence that is deeply disturbing.
And then we meet Abra Stone, a young girl with incredibly powerful shining abilities.
Yeah.
She inadvertently attracts the attention of the True Knot, And that's when things really get interesting.
Abra represents a new generation of Shining.
Yes.
Her abilities manifest differently than Danny's. She's much more aware and in control from a young age.
You almost get the sense that shining is instinctive for her, as natural as breathing. And unlike Danny, she doesn't have a mentor like Dick Halloran to guide her in the beginning. She's figuring things out on her own.
That makes her a fascinating contrast to Dan, who has spent years trying to suppress his Shining, to numb himself to the pain it brings.
And that's a perfect segue to talk about Dan's struggles with addiction. He spends years running from his demons, seeking solace in alcohol.
Dan's addiction is a powerful illustration of the long-lasting impact of trauma.
Right.
He's trying to drown out the memories, the terror, the Shining itself.
And it's a vicious cycle, isn't it? The more he
Yeah.
drinks, the more vulnerable he becomes to the darkness, both within himself and in the world around him.
It's heartbreaking, but it also speaks to the complexity of his character. He's not a superhero. He's a flawed human being trying to cope with unimaginable experiences.
But even in his struggles, there's a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
He becomes known as Dr. Sleep, using his shining to comfort dying patients at a hospice.
It's such a poignant detail. He's using this gift born from trauma to try and ease the suffering of others.
It's almost as if he's trying to atone for the darkness he sees in himself, to bring a flicker of light into the face of death.
It really speaks to the duality of Shining.
Right.
Its potential for both good and evil.
And then the story takes a dramatic turn when Abra contacts Dan, desperate for his help. She's become the target of the True Knot, and she recognizes that he's the only one who can truly understand what she's going through.
That's when the narrative shifts from individual struggles to a battle against a very real and terrifying evil.
What I found so compelling about their initial connection was that it was sparked by a simple object, a baseball glove.
Oh yes, the glove belonging to the young boy with Shining, who was murdered by the True Knot.
It becomes a symbol of the True Knot's brutality and a physical link between Abra and Dan.
Uh-huh.
Despite the years and distance that separate them, it's almost as if this glove, imbued with the essence of the murdered boy, is screaming out for justice.
It's a brilliant narrative device, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It ignites a sense of urgency, drawing them together and setting the stage for the inevitable confrontation with the True Knot.
Which I believe is where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
We left off with Abra and Dan drawn together by a shared sense of urgency, preparing to confront the True Knot. But before we dive into that epic showdown, I want to take a moment to consider the larger themes at play here, especially the cyclical nature of trauma.
That's such an insightful observation, and it's woven throughout the entire story. We see it most obviously with Danny struggling to escape the shadow of his father's violence at the Overlook. It's like the sins of the father are revisited upon the son, but with this glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, Danny can break the cycle.
And we see it with Dick Halloran, too, right? He uses his own experience with abuse to guide Danny to protect him from falling into that same trap.
It makes you wonder if Dick's past is what motivates him to use his Shining for good to help others. It's certainly possible his experiences with his grandfather highlight how easily power, in this case Shining, can be misused. It becomes a cautionary tale shaping his entire approach to mentoring Danny.
And then there's the True Knot. Their whole existence seems to revolve around this horrific cycle of trauma.
That's a chilling but accurate way to put it. They're driven by a desperate need to consume steam to prolong their lives, but in doing so, they perpetuate the very trauma that sustains them.
It's like they're trapped in this horrifying feedback loop, feeding on the innocence of others to avoid confronting their own mortality, their own fears and vulnerabilities.
And that brings us to another crucial theme in Dr. Sleep. The responsibility that comes with wielding power Shining in this world isn't just a cool ability, it's a burden, a double-edged sword.
I keep thinking about that classic Spider-Man line, with great power comes great responsibility. But in Dr. Sleep, the stakes are so much higher, the consequences so much more terrifying.
Exactly, and what I appreciate about King's approach is that he doesn't offer easy answers. He gives us characters who are deeply flawed, who make mistakes, who grapple with the weight of their abilities.
Dan and Abra, they both possess this incredible power, but they're constantly questioning how to use it, how to control it. They make mistakes, they experience doubt, they're tempted by darkness. It's that internal struggle that makes them so relatable, so human.
It reminds us that even with extraordinary abilities, we're still susceptible to temptation, to the allure of power. It's a constant choice, a battle between our better angels and the darker impulses that reside within us all.
That's what makes Dr. Sleep so captivating, that tension between light and darkness, We see the potential for both good and evil in these characters, and it keeps us on the edge of our seats wondering which path they'll ultimately choose.
And that brings us back to the showdown at the Bluebell Campground. The culmination of all these themes and struggles. It's not just a battle between good and evil, it's a battle for the soul of Shining itself.
And the location is significant too,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
The fact that it takes place near the ruins of the Overlook Hotel, it's like this ground is cursed, soaked in the psychic residue of all the horror that transpired there.
The choice of setting is brilliant. It draws a direct line back to the source of Dan's trauma, highlighting the cyclical nature of evil. It's as if the Overlook's darkness has seeped into the surrounding landscape, tainting everything it touches.
And it adds this palpable layer of dread to the whole confrontation. You can almost feel the weight of the Overlook's legacy pressing down on the characters, amplifying the tension and raising the stakes.
It creates a sense of inevitability, a feeling that this battle was destined to happen on this ground, a final reckoning with the ghosts of the past.
And in the midst of all the chaos and violence, Dan confronts his own capacity for darkness. He makes a decision, a desperate choice, to use the dying breath of Abra's great-grandmother, who we know was a powerful shiner, as a weapon against the True Knot. It's a victory, but it comes at a cost.
That moment is pivotal for Dan's character arc. It blurs the line between hero and monster, forcing him to confront the darkness within himself.
It raises so many questions. Does the end justify the means? Can you fight evil without becoming tainted by it?
Exactly. And King doesn't shy away from the moral ambiguity of that decision. He leaves us wrestling with these uncomfortable questions long after the battle is over.
It's a stark reminder that power, even when used for good, can corrupt it, sure. It makes you wonder about the long-term consequences for Dan, how this act will shape his future.
And I think that's what makes Dr. Sleep such a profound and thought-provoking story. It challenges us to confront these difficult questions, to consider our own capacity for both darkness and light.
It's not a simple story about good versus evil. It's a nuanced exploration of the human condition, the choices we make and the consequences that ripple outward, shaping not only our own lives, but the lives of those around us.
And that leads us to the final chapter of our deep dive, where we'll explore the aftermath of the battle, the profound impact it has on Dan and Abra, and the implications for the future of Shining in this world.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Dr. Sleep. We left off discussing Dan's difficult decision to use a dying woman's shine as a weapon against the True Knot.
Right.
It was a victory,
Yeah.
but one that came at a heavy price.
It's a victory that raises complex moral questions. Can you truly fight darkness without being tainted by it?
Yeah.
Dan's actions in that climactic battle force us to consider the potential for corruption that exists within even the most well-intentioned individuals.
And in the aftermath, we see Dan wrestling with the weight of that choice. He's haunted by the darkness. He embraced the violence he unleashed. He could have easily buried those feelings, but instead he chooses to confess to Abra, to acknowledge the horror of what he did.
That confession speaks volumes about Dan's growth. He's breaking free from the cycle of secrecy and denial that defined his father,
Right.
choosing honesty and vulnerability as a path towards healing.
And Abra, despite her youth, demonstrates a remarkable understanding of the complexities of Dan's actions. It would have been easy for her to judge him, to recoil from the darkness he revealed. But instead she offers forgiveness and compassion.
The relationship deepens in the aftermath of the battle. They become more than just mentor and student. They become kindred spirits, bound by their shared experiences, their shared shining, and the challenge that come with it.
This is an incredibly poignant scene where Abra asks Dan why she still dreams about the battle, why she feels a flicker of regret for the joy she felt in destroying Rose the Hat, the leader of the True Knot.
Right.
It's a question that cuts to the heart of their shared struggle.
Right.
How do you wield such power without being consumed by it?
Dan's response is both insightful and heartbreaking. He talks about the pull of blood calling to blood, that primal instinct for violence that can be amplified by shining. But he also stresses the importance of choice. They have the power to decide how they use their abilities to resist the allure of darkness and strive to be forces for good in a world that often seems determined to drag them down.
It's a powerful reminder that even when faced with unimaginable evil, we have the capacity to choose a different path. We're not defined by our darkest impulses. We have the power to make choices that align with our values, with our desire to bring light into the world.
And that brings us to the final haunting image of the novel, Dan attending Abra's high school graduation. Years have passed. The scars of their battles have faded, but the connection between them remains strong.
It's a bittersweet ending. Dan is older, wearier, but you sense a profound peace within him. He's finally come to terms with his past, with the darkness he carries, and he's found a way to use his shining for good.
And Abra, on the cusp of adulthood, is ready to face the world with her shining, as both a gift and a responsibility.
Hmm.
She's learned from Dan's struggles. She understands the dangers and temptations that come with her abilities, and she's chosen to embrace the light.
But what really resonated with me was that final thought that King leaves us.
Well-
The idea that the world is filled with individuals who possess shining, most of them unaware of their abilities, living seemingly ordinary lives. It's a reminder that the potential for both good and evil exists within all of us.
It's a powerful message, isn't it? The choices we make, the way we choose to use our gifts, our talents, our shining, that's what ultimately determines our path.
Dr. Sleep is more than just a horror novel. It's a profound exploration of the human condition, the choices we make and the consequences that ripple outwards, shaping not only our own lives, but the lives of those around us.
It reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable horror, we have the capacity for growth, for healing, for redemption. It's a story that stays with you long after you finish reading it, prompting introspection and challenging you to consider your own capacity for both darkness and light.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Dr. Sleep. We hope you'll continue to explore the rich and complex stories that Stephen King creates, stories that challenge us, provoke us, and ultimately remind us of the enduring power of the human spirit.